Great. Okay, Haribol, let's start.
Haribol, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Jai. As day turned to twilight, temple bells rang throughout the town. Abai walked to the western side of the roof and looked into the city of thousands of temples. The Govindaji temple, the Ranganath temple, and thousands of smaller temples were having their Sandhya Arti and Kirtan glorifying Lord Krishna. Abai responded to the sights and sounds of Vrindavan as only a pure devotee could. His thoughts and emotions were full of appreciation and awareness of Krishna, Krishna's devotees, and Krishna's land. Naturally, he began to think of preaching, hankering for others to know the intimate peace and ecstasy of Vrindavan. Krishna is the supreme personality, inviting all souls to join him in his eternal abode. Yet even in India, few understood. And outside India, people knew nothing of Vrindavan, or of the Yamuna, or of what it means to be free of material desires. Why shouldn't people all around the world have that? This was the abode of peace, yet no one knew anything of it, nor were people interested. But this is what they were actually hankering for. Abai thought of Back to Godhead and how, by Krishna's grace, he might expand his preaching beyond India to the whole world. As God brothers, it would have been better if they had all worked together in the Gaudiya Math, but many principles. None of them, however, seemed to be doing much beyond maintaining a temple here and an ashram there, worshipping a deity, eating and sleeping. But there was so much more to be done in broadcasting the glories of Vrindavan. Abai chanted and thought of Krishna. Gradually he turned to his task of producing the October issue of Back to Godhead, due to be printed shortly in Delhi. He had a deadline to keep. The next morning before sunrise, the residents of Vrindavan were astir, bathing in the Yamuna, performing puja to their deities, reciting mantras. But Abai was awake even before most, writing in stillness beneath the light in his rooftop room. As he wrote diligently in English, scriptural references appeared and took their place within convincing arguments. For hours he wrote page after page in an exercise book until gradually the chirping of awakening birds signaled the end of the dark night's stillness. Soon the sun would rise. Keeping to his regular schedule, he put aside his writing and began chanting japa, staying in his room, uttering the Hare Krishna mantra in a soft, deep voice. Even before the first traces of light in the sky, before the river was visible, a few Babajis reciting prayers made their way through the streets, heading for the Yamuna. By 4 a.m., gongs and temple bells throughout the city heralded the Mangal Arti of the deity. Abai continued chanting alone for another hour. Then he prepared to bathe, lowering the bucket on its long rope and hauling water up to the rooftop. It was light when he went out, but his bead bag around his neck, a few copies of Back to Godhead in his hand. Turning right at the temple door, he walked the tight, crooked lane past alleys, dirt paths, and cross lanes, which interlaced in a winding network. There were no shops in the area, only silent buildings, many of them hundreds of years old. The neighborhood was serene. Someone played on wooden clackers and sang Hare Krishna softly. At a crossroads where dark women filled brass water pots from a well, Abai turned left onto a street lined with small open porches. On either side he saw ornate temple architecture. One entrance marked by 2 stone lions, another by a carved elephant with teeth like a tiger's. A brick and mortar wall was crumbling with age. Soon Abai arrived at the Radha Raman temple, established almost 500 years before by Gopal Bhatta Goswami, one of Lord Chaitanya's chief followers. Here, residents of Vrindavan were coming and going according to their vows, following a strict schedule that allowed not a moment's delay. Making their daily visit to various temples, Abai entered and stood amidst a group of worshippers, viewing the deity wearing a fresh garland of flowers, his enchanting black form adorned with bright silks and jewels. Knowing the priests of Radharani to be respected, learned Sanskritists, some of whom also read English, Abai had brought with him a few copies of Back to Godhead. He met Vishwambar Goswami, a young priest in his 30s, who after the death of his father had left his law practice and taken over some of the temple management. The temple was run under a caste Goswami system, and thus for 500 years, Vishwambar's ancestors had handed down charge of the temple. Although Vishwambar had met many sadhus, he was immediately struck by Abai. He accepted the copies of Back to Godhead and sat and talked with Abai. Abai then continued along Vrindavan's winding lanes to visit another temple, Radha Damodar. He passed old Babajis and women carrying water, a commercial shop beside an open porch where people worshipped a Shiva Linga, monkeys sitting atop a high concrete wall and ranging from roof to roof, ledge to ledge, chattered and gestured as Abai walked beneath. As the morning progressed, barefoot children had begun to appear more frequently, playing within the open doorways. As he walked along chanting japa, his right hand in his bead bag, his lips moving softly, hardly anyone in Vrindavan knew him. But as an elderly, cultured Bengali gentleman, he did not seem an unusual sight. He was a religious babu in a town devoted entirely to religion. Leave all.
Vrindavan important temples. And afterwards, he would shop, returning to his room around 11 with vegetables for cooking. Using the kerosene burner and the three-tiered cooker, he would cook rice, potatoes, and something sabji. He would also cook chapatis. He would take only one meal a day at noon and in evening a cup of milk. When he did not have time to cook, he would take the prasadam of the deity. After lunch, he would nap for 15 minutes and then write. He rarely received visitors but stay alone writing. Just before sunset, he would again go out visiting temples. At Keshi Ghat, he would pass by sadhus sitting alone here and there, facing the Yamuna. The river itself was little trafficked. Sometimes a boat or two slowly moving on the river placidity. Sometimes a fish splashed in the water or a bird being winched along the river. Watchful, Keshigarh was quiet and beautiful, especially after the sun had relented for the day. Sadhus would hail Abhay on sight with Vrindavan's common greetings, Jai Radhe, and Abhay would return his Hare Krishna. When in the evening he walked through town, he would find himself amidst the vibration of one kirtan after another. The temple of Krishna, Rama, Chaitanya, Narasimha, or Shiva, in ashram hall, in homes, even amongst groups walking on the street, there would be kirtan. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We'd often see Bengali widows gathered together in a hall. Thousands of them lived in ashram in Vrindavan, staying together with a few ones, wearing dull white sari, keeping their hair cut short, never leaving Vrindavan even for Mathura, wanting only to stay chanting Hare Krishna. The man would sit playing mridanga and leading a chant while a group of widows clapped their hands unevenly, responding in their childlike voice. The drums, the clappings, the singers, unpolished but earnest, made a sweet sound in the evening. As Abhay walked, Kirtan feared that another would rise loudly before him and then fade behind him as another rose to meet him. A temple bell ringing formidably, intermingling the drums, cymbal, chorus of another groups, or a single person passing nearby singing his own Radhe Radhe. Even the greetings were kirtan. Jairaj, as face passed, as cars clattered by, as men joked or made their last transaction of the day in the market, and as stray cows made their way home, their bells clanging around their necks, somehow everything was in connection with Krishna. Returned to the secluded Vamshi Gopalji temple. There also he would hear kirtans, only more private, a husband and wife in their room, a man playing mridanga and singing one line of the bhajana, his wife singing in response. Vrindavan was not ordinary. Every singer sounded sweet in his own way, an expert melodist. Everyone sang of Krishna. Krishna was present in every occasion and event. Srila Prabhupada, the glories of Krishna nobody can understand. Similarly, Vrindavan, the land which is known as Vrindavan, also you will find unlimited potency of spiritual atmosphere. Still, if you place Vrindavan is as good as Krishna, it is also worshipable.
Commuting became difficult. He would take the morning train into Delhi and having now here
Nowhere.
nowhere, sorry, nowhere to stay, returned to Vrindavana the same night. That didn't give him much time in Delhi and it was expensive. At first, he had stayed with Mr. Gupta, a pious gentleman who studied the Gita regularly and afforded sadhus a place to stay. Abhay had explained to Mr. Gupta about his back to Godhead and his experience in Vrindavan. Mr. Gupta had explained to Abhay that expenses, it was difficult to raise enough in donations to cover traveling, printing, and mailing. Copies of Back to God Away wasn't difficult, and he was doing that in Vrindavana. But working alone, writing, editing, selling, soliciting donations was too much. The printer, Mr. Jain, was amazed, wondering why a person would put himself through such difficulties printing a newspaper he couldn't afford. Sri Prabhupada, I back to God day and night. In the beginning, when I was a householder, I did not care if somebody paid or not paid. I used to distribute liberally. But when I left my household life and I was living alone, sometimes in Vrindavana and sometimes in Delhi, or sometimes traveling for pushing on BTG, they were very hard days. After his 12th consecutive 14th edition, the issue for November 2019 out of money. Mr. Jain had to throw up his hands, saying he couldn't print simply out of friendship. To Vrindavana, where he spent his time writing, but with no plan for publication. It was because people weren't interested in becoming Krishna conscious because they had no time that Back to Godhead had failed financially. Certain sadhus in India were celebrated, and Abhay was not amongst them. Of course, the uncompromising preaching he had learned from his spiritual master, the chopping technique, in which he openly criticized revered politicians and holy men, was likely to win him favor and patronage. Don't flatter, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had said. Speak the truth. And if Krishna is pleased, then you will become successful. Money will come. And Abhay had firm faith in this. That was his outstanding asset, his faith in his spiritual master. He was sure that by following Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he would receive his blessings and the blessings of Lord Chaitanya. Although for the last 2 years he had any path that had opened as far as it had led, he had remained open, one pointed, aimed at serving the order of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was later, he would obtain substantial backing, he would find a sympathetic audience since workers would join sincere workers would join him. Somebody else would like to read?
Hare Krishna.
When I read,
Go ahead.
can
Right, you just go ahead.
will I read? Okay.
Okay, I will read it. Okay. Hare Krishna. A letter came from Abe in Vrindavana from his disciple Acharya Prabhakar Misra, and it gave Abe an idea. Acharya Prabhakar, who was in Bombay working as secretary of the Sanskrit department at the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, invited Srila Bhaktivedanta Prabhu to join him, therefore preaching together. Just as in the old days, the founder director of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, K.M. Munshi, the same governor whose wife had pressured Abe to give up Radha Memorial in Yanchi, but Acharya Prabhakar, having recently established a friendship with the governor, intimated to Abe that the governor might be willing to help. Thus, in January 1957, after assuring Mahant Gopal that he would return and that he would send 5 rupees a month for his room, Abe traveled to Bombay. Acharya Prabhakar got Abe quarters in the faculty residence and introduced him to various scholars and religionists. They then attended a lecture by Governor Munshi, "What is wrong with the world?" Afterwards, Abe approached his appreciation of the speech, but stressing that it would take a spiritual moment to avert the imminent global disasters. Without God consciousness, even Mr. Monsi work in the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan would be a waste of time. Abe spoke to his interest in reviving the liege of devotees, and suggested he suggested how he might work within the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan to infuse the life of God consciousness into the governor's cultural projects. Governor Munshi responded by offering Abe a post as honorary professor of Bhagavad Gita. Abe accepted and gave the governor some copies of Back to Godhead, requesting that he read them in his spare time. Haribol. Someone can continue, please.
Okay, I can read. As honorary professor, Abai began each class with Hare Krishna Kirtan and then lectured on the Gita, presenting Lord Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but he soon found his post confining. Within the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, he found little scope for reviving the League of Devotees. Then, along with other members of the Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, Abai attended the 5th annual convention of the World Academy of Sanskrit at Kurukshetra, where 5,000 years ago, Lord Krishna had spoken Bhagavad Gita. India's president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, Governor Munshi, and many scholars and pandits from all over India participated in the discourses, but everyone there had his own thing to say, apart from the conclusions of Lord Krishna, so Abai considered the meeting a waste of time. Since he was not scheduled to speak, since the non-devotional discussions on the Gita disturbed him, and since he saw that nothing practical would come of such a theoretical meeting, he left Kurukshetra and returned to Vrindavan. Acharya Prabhakar soon joined Abai. As they talked together in Abai's room at Vamshi Gopalaji temple, Abai spoke again of his desire to revive the League of Devotees. After having recently seen the watered-down cultural programs in Bombay and Kurukshetra, he felt even of pure devotees. There were already so many cultural and religious organizations. If he liked, he could join one organization with which he could affiliate himself wholeheartedly. Only the League of Devotees espoused the conclusions of Lord Chaitanya and Bhaktisiddhanta Sarasvati, the vigorous worldwide preaching of devotional service to Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Abai drafted an appeal to the generous public, modern philosophers, leaders, and religionists on behalf of the League of Devotees, stated would be to publish Back to Godhead in English, with translations in many other languages, to educate young men and women for worldwide preaching, and to operate a press solely for printing transcendental literature. These programs would require an estimated 3,000 rupees per month, and he appealed for help. Abai concluded, Vrindavan is most important, and the headquarter of this league is therefore situated here. Using the impressive new titles, Honorary Professor of Gita, Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan, and Honorary Secretary of Hari Bhavan, Abai, with the assistance of Acharya Prabhakar, launched another attempt at rallying support for Back to Godhead and the League of Devotees. Within a few days, Acharya Prabhakar returned to his post in Bombay, and Abai was again alone. He loved Vrindavan, yet with no means to publish and preach, he was not content there. If he were to travel, he might be able to enlist members for the League. He thought of Kanpur, which was nearby, a city of more than 100 big factories and many wealthy industrialists, some of whom he had met during his business travels. He decided to go. After printing some League of Devotee membership forms, he explained to Mahant Gopal that he would be away for a couple of months. The Mahant was surprised, although most elderly sadhus who came to Vrindavan stayed put, and some even took vows never to leave. This quiet Babu was coming and going constantly. Hare Krishna. Someone else like to read?
Can I read? Abai preached Shakti in Kapur, staying in various homes and convincing for league members. As the guest of the Anandeshwar Satsang Mandal, he lectured regularly at the popular government Bhavin Gata on the Ganges. He especially made acquaintances among industrialists and educators, often sitting and conversing with them for hours, and many were impressed by his dedication and his soft-spoken tone. His collection was small. When he offered the wealthy magnates his constitutional membership, they usually opted in favor of the 2 rupees a year subscriber membership. He collected a few letters of appreciation, but after 2 months he left. After some months in Vrindavana, Abai decided to go back to Bombay and preach. In Bombay, he quickly broken off his association with the shifting Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and moved out of the faculty residence there, staying a week at a time in the home of various patrons. He tried to generate interest in the missionary activities. When a friend of Acharya Prabhakar arranged for Abai to address at a Bombay beach, Abai accepted, following already established custom. He sat on a cushion and the people gathered, from 500 to 1,000, sitting and listening, as he loudly spoke the philosophy of Bhagavad Gita. Abai spoke with, and there were other lectures opportunities. 1 week he spoke several times at a Bombay Vishnu temple. But Abai wanted to do more than deliver occasional lectures to uncommitted audiences. The conviction was growing within him that he should preach outside India. The idea, of course, has been there for some time. He had expressed it in his prospectus for the League of Devotees before gathering at the Radha Memorial in Jhansi during his meeting at the Bihar Mandir in Delhi and on many other occasions. Informally, he had expressed it hundreds of times to acquaintances and he had woven his dream throughout his writing. Can I just stop here? Hare Krishna.
He was ready to travel anywhere if he could fulfill Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's order to preach in English. In India, the English speaking population was small, so Abhay continued to dream of going to West. If he could travel to Bombay, Delhi, and Kanpur, why not to London or New York, where millions spoke English and had never heard the message of Lord Chaitanya? Writing to Mr. Ved Prakash, a Kanpur industrialist, Abhay explained his idea. Lord Chaitanya said, Pranimam apakraya, apakaryaya, to say, for the benefit of all livings being concerned, while rendering first aid service in the battlefield the Red Crossmen, although equally disposed to all the wounded soldiers, they gave first preference to the hopeful ones. The hopeless ones are sometimes neglected. In India, even after the attainment of Swaraj, the mentality of predominant by made in London ideas. It is a long story, but in nutshell, the leaders of India, in the name of secular government, they had engaged themselves in everything foreign. They have carefully set aside the treasures house of India's spiritual imitating the Western material way of life, constantly engaged in the acts of error of judgment, misgiving, imperfectness, and duplicity. India's Vedic knowledge is above all the conditional defects mentioned above. But we Indians at the present moment have neglected such a wonderful Vedic knowledge. It is due to its improper handling. This Vedanta Sutra is presented in India persons of different camps, and as such the people are being misguided. Newly sprung up national enthusiasm of Indian leaders, industrialists, and planners have no time or nor desire to understand the message of Vedanta Sutra or even the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot do act of humanity without proper guidance. So, my idea of preaching in the foreign countries means that they are rather fed up with the material advancement of knowledge. They are seeking the message guidance of the Vedanta Sutra or for the matter of Bhagavad Gita in an authentic way. And I am sure India will again go back to the spiritual life when the principle is accepted by the Europeans, Americans, etc. Because the Indians people are now in habit of begging after neglecting their own property. That was my viewpoint. But all the same, we must take only the opportunity of service. One way of expanding his way of preaching was to mail copies back to Godhead outside India. And as an incentive for enlisting in donors, he made it known that the donor's name would be printed on each was to bring in large donation, run large printings, and send back to Godhead to more than 50 countries. He assigned codes. America would receive 10,000 copies, Argentina 500, Belgium 500, Brazil 500, Burma 1000, Canada 500, Chile 500, China 10,000, so on, including 10,000 for the Russia and 10,000 for England. But the donors and the donations never appeared. and the plans for back to Godhead never realized. Abhay found that while the people of India's educated cultural class were rejecting their own spiritual culture, and religiously inclined masses were being buffed by an array of conflicting unauthorized doctrines presented in the name of Hinduism. An alarming example of this came to his attention as he was preaching in Bombay during summer 1958. Bhagavad Week was being published by group whose teaching conflicted with the pure parampara presentation of Bhagavata. The Srimad Bhagavatam was the devotional scripture par excellence, the literary incarnation of Krishna, yet of Bhagavad Gita were using Srimad Bhagavatam to teach impersonalism and minimize Lord Krishna. Friends, Abhay learned that outrageous meetings and finally on July 28, 1958, to the Bhagavad Gita leader Sri Ratnasri, imploring him to stay away from Srimad Bhagavatam. Haribol.
Well, I beg to inform you that I am in receipt of your invitation letter in the matter of observing Bhagavad Week through the Secretary of Bombay Spiritual Center. As I know what sort of Bhagavad Week can be observed by the Mayavadins for misleading the innocent, therefore I not only restrain myself from attending the function, but also I advise many others not to attend, for the very reason that the recitation of the Holy Bhagavad is being performed by men who have no access in this great scripture, in which only the liberated persons who are freed from all pretentious religiosities can. Some friends who attended your Bhagavad Week have told me how the pasam of Lord Krishna were being wrongly interpreted in your organization on the pretext of saving Krishna from being an immoral personality. To save these foolish audiences in future, Maharaj Parikshit had already asked Sripad Sukadev Goswami to clear the Rasa Leela activities of Lord Krishna. The transcendental nature of Rasa Leela does not require to be apologized by any Mayavadi or mundane moralist. The Leela is what it is. In the shloka number 30, it is forbidden that a mundane person should indulge in hearing Rasa Leela or should hear Rasa Leela from a mundane person. In your organized and the lecture on mundane persons and their indulgence in the matter of Rasa Leela out of sheer foolishness will result in imitating Rudra who swallowed up an ocean of poison. Abe warned that legal action could be taken against such a religious fraud, but Bhagavad Gita continued and hundreds were cheated. While the professed followers of Vedic culture were being baffled in their allegiance, modern ones were rejecting Vedic culture as backwards and irrelevant. There was Prime Minister Nehru who wasn't at all spiritually inclined. He was for modernization and for what Abhay called made in London ideas. At least Mahatma Gandhi, although he had never responded to Abhay's letter, had been spiritually inclined, but not so his followers. And did Nehru. Still, for the way India's leaders were rejecting their country's spiritual heritage, Abhay decided to write Pandit Nehru. Although in Bombay, Abhay was practically homeless, in August of 1958 he boldly wrote the Prime Minister, expressing his conviction that India's spiritual culture must not only be revived at home, but also be distributed to the West. He reminded Pandit Nehru that from ancient Greece down to the atomic age of the Western world had seen only materialism and had therefore never known peace. If Nehru were to continue following the path of materialism, the only result would be strife and war. Therefore, India may not waste her time in imitating the Western way of life. You have admitted it that the position of Indian culture is of high order, but at the same time you want to bring in material prosperity by scientific advancement of knowledge. But what is that scientific knowledge? Spiritualism is also advanced scientific knowledge. Material advancement of scientific knowledge cannot give even material prosperity to the people in general. Do you think that horseless carriage or telephonic or radio communication or any other such ephemeral facilities of life can bring in material prosperity? No, it cannot. Material prosperity means the people must have sufficient to eat or to maintain the body very soundly. Do you think that have brought in the material prosperity, or that modern Western civilization can bring in that prosperity? Even they are given that facility, the unrest will continue to go on till there is spiritual satisfaction of life. That is the secret of peace. The next, Lalita.
Even without having been to the West, Abhay expressed his conviction that the Americans and even the Russians spiritual realization. They could not have become satisfied merely with material advancement. Pandit Nehru, therefore, should help his friends in the West by offering them spiritual knowledge from India. Poverty means poverty of knowledge. Prime Minister Chanakya in a thatched cottage, but he was the dictator of India during the time of Chandragupta. Mahatma Gandhi voluntarily accepted the way of living of the so-called poor man and was the dictator of Indian destiny. But was he poverty-stricken? He was proud of his spiritual knowledge. Therefore, spiritual man, really a rich man, and not the radio set or the motor car, etc. Back in the 1930s, the Nehru family had bought their medicines from Abhay's Prayag pharmacy. And Abhay now appealed to Pandit Nehru as an old friend from Allahabad. Just as Abhay had requested Mahatma Gandhi, he requested Nehru to leave his political responsibilities and, as a popular gentleman of the world, engage the rest of your life in this organized spiritual movement of Western material science combined with Indian way of spiritual realization. As with his letter to Gandhi, his letter to Nehru went unanswered. Among Abhay's former Bombay contacts was Mr. Harbanslal, a landlord who had once assured Abhay that he would provide him lodging whenever he needed. In the summer of 1958, Abhay went to call on Mr. Harbanslal only to find that he had gone to the West. When Abhay learned that Mr. Harbanslal was traveling on a cultural mission, his imagination seized on the idea of an Indian on a cultural mission in the West. He wrote to Mr. Harbanslal asking for a place to stay, but also presenting his own cultural mission. Abhay knew that many Westerners respected Indian culture. He had heard from his German godbrother that although Indians who went to the West, especially to Germany, were well received, they were sometimes tested on their knowledge of Indian culture. So Abhay advised Mr. Harbanslal to teach the real conclusion of Indian culture as he traveled. I think that people need this Indian message in this hour of necessity when the atomic bomb is hovering over the head of the human society. Please therefore begin the activities for the benefit of all people in the foreign countries since you have gone there. Clearly, Abhay would have liked to have gone himself. Harbanslal of his promise to provide him with an apartment. I am passing my days in Bombay in great inconvenience for want of a suitable residential place. But the letter never caught up with the touring Mr. Harbanslal. Wanting to go to the West as soon as possible, Abhay visited one of his godbrothers in Bombay, Kripa Sindhu, and asked him to help. Kripa Sindhu. He came to my house and asked me to help him in going to America, which he said I could show to people to ask for help on his behalf. I tried to do something in this regard. I introduced Abhay Babu to one man, a big industrialist, Hemraj Khandelwala. I went also. The three of us sat down, and I told the man how Abhay wanted to go to the West, and how he was a good devotee and was writing and doing so many things, but somehow or other the man did not help. Kripa Sindhu told Abhay of how the Gaudiya Math in Bombay had sometimes been assisted by a pious business magnate, Mrs. Sumati Morarji, head of Scindia Steamship Lines. Abhay tried to. He did, however, see one of Mrs. Morarji's employees, a deputy manager for the Scindia Company, who heard him out and, to Abhay's surprise, responded generously. Considering Abhay a genuine sadhu, the Scindia agent offered him a 50% concession on a voyage from India to the United States. He even put it in writing. Abhay immediately began arranging, but he could not raise even the half fare. Back in 1956, in Delhi, he had been struggling and homeless, and now, as he considered his last 2 years of traveling out of Vrindavan, he felt that his position hadn't really improved. Perhaps Krishna didn't want him to succeed in this way, but one positive thing he had gained: determination to go to the West and preach with success. Someone else would like to read?
Guess we'll start again.
Okay, this is exciting. I'll keep going. Alone and poor, Abhay returned to Vrindavan. He was 62, but he wasn't thinking of return. More than ever, his mood was reflective and renounced. Because few people knew him, and because he wanted to write, he kept to himself. He enjoyed deep peace as a resident of Vrindavan. Outside his window, the sacred Yamuna flowed for his private audience. The Keshigat neighborhood was quiet, though in the pre-dawn he could hear a few devotees bathing and chanting. When the moon was full, the river seemed like a coolly resplendent jewel. In the morning, the sun would appear like a red smudge, a fire burning through an opaque wall, at last bursting forth and clearing the entire sky, until in the hot blaze of the noon, while the room would be in the shadows, Abhay could see from his window a shimmering sun high in the sky and glittering across the silver sheet of the gentle river. Without so much as leaving his room, from his doorway, he could see hundreds of temples clustered together for miles in the friendly town of Vrindavan. The various punctual kirtans and bell ringings in the temples, the spontaneous songs to Lord Krishna in numerous homes and in the streets rose and filled the air with devotion. On the veranda, Abhay could chant japa, and there would be no interruption. He enjoyed a simple, almost carefree life of minimalized physical wants. A few hours of rest at night, a little prasadam at noon, the simplest clothing, and he did not have to flatter or manage anyone's life. His mind and intelligence were free and dwelt constantly on his service to his spiritual master. He saw his present circumstances as a preparation for a greater task before him. Despite his advanced age, he felt that he had hardly begun his work, yet he felt confident. He had his vision of a world association of devotees. It was not an idle dream, although he was not certain how it would all come about, but he knew his duty. For the present, he would go on describing his vision, the vision of his predecessor spiritual masters, in articles and books. Go to the West. Westerners, he had concluded, were not satisfied with a materially comfortable life devoid of spiritual understanding. More than his fellow Indians, they would be open to the message of the absolute truth. He knew he should go, and he would go, if Krishna desired. Abhay lived frugally in Vrindavan, keeping exact account of every expenditure and every receipt. He carefully kept a ledger, just as if he were running a substantial business, even though his purchases were only a little milk, a few vegetables, charcoal for cooking, bus rides, and his major expenditure, postage. Next.
Abhay composed a Bengali poem, Vrindavan Bhajana. Its opening stanza were especially self-reflective and personal. I am sitting alone in Vrindavan Dham. In this mood, I am getting many realization. I have my wife, son, daughters, grandson, everything, but I have no money, so there are fruitless glory. Krishna has shown me the naked form of material nature. By his strength, it has all become tasteless to me today. Yashyam anugrahanmi arishya tat dhanam sanaiha shaneha. I gradually take away all the wealth of those upon whom I am merciful. How was I am able to understand this mercy of the all merciful? Everyone has abandoned me, seeing me penniless. Wife, relatives, friends, brothers, everyone. This is misery. But it gives me a love. I sit alone and love. In this Maya Samsara, whom do I really love? Where have my loving father, mother gone now? And where are all my elders? And who were my own folks? Who will give me news of them? Tell me who. All that is left of this family life is the list of names. As the froth of the sea water mixes again in the sea, Maya Samsara plays just like that. No one is no one is mother or father or personal relative. Just like a sea foam, they remain but a short time. Just as the froth on sea water mixes again in the sea, the body made of five elements meets with destruction. How many bodies does the embodied soul takes in this way? His relatives are all relatively related merely to temporal body. But everyone in your spiritual platform, this relationship is not tinged with the smell of Maya. The Supreme Lord is the soul of everyone. In relation to Him, everyone in the universe is the same. All your relatives, brother, all the billions of jivas, when seen in relation to Krishna, they are all in harmony. Forgetting Krishna, the jiva desire sense gratification, and as a result, he is firmly grasped by Maya. Hare Krishna. So we'll stop here. I want to continue, Prabhu. It's going to be 8.
Will we just do one little small other section? Another page and a bit.
Yeah.
On an October visit to Delhi, Abhay received a donation from Kaviraj Sarkar to be used for printing 1,000 copies of Back to Godhead. Abhay promptly printed 20 issue of Back to Godhead with the donor's name on the front page. It was the first issue in 2 years. Another donor, Mr. Subodh Kumar Kapoor of Ramalal Kapoor and Sons, followed Mr. Sarkar's example and donated 1,000 copies for the November 20 issue. The front page article in the November issue was Truth and Beauty, an editorial in the Times of India speculating on whether truth and beauty were compatible, had opined that truth was not always beautiful but often ugly and unpleasant. Abai disagreed. Truth is so beautiful that many sages, saints, and devotees have left everything for the sake of truth, but we are habituated to love untruth from time immemorial in the name of truth. Abai agreed, however, they were incompatible. Not only was mundane truth not beautiful, it was not truth, and mundane beauty was not real beauty. To explain, Abai told a story. Once a man fell in love with a beautiful girl who tried to resist the man's advances. When he persisted, she requested that he wait for 7 days, after which she would accept him. During the next 7 days, the girl took a strong purgative and laxative and repeatedly passed stool and vomited. She stored the refuse in buckets. Thus, the so called beautiful girl became lean, thin like and turned blackish in complexion, and the beautiful eyeballs were pushed into the sockets of the skull. The man well dressed and well behaved and asked the waiting girl, who was appearance, about the beautiful girl who called him there. The man could not recognize the waiting girl as the same beautiful girl whom he was asking for. The same girl, however, was in a pitiable condition, and the foolish man, in spite of repeated assertion, could not recognize her. It was all due to the action of the medicine only. At last, the girl told the powerful man all the stories of her beauty and told him that she had separated the ingredients of her body and her beauty and stored them up in the reservoirs. She also told him that he could enjoy the juices of beauty stored up in the reservoirs. The monk or the lunatic man agreed to see the juices of beauty, and thus he was directed to the store of loose stool and liquid vomit, which were emanating unbearable bad smell, and thus the whole story of beauty liquid was disclosed to him. Anyone would like to read?
It's more than 8 now.
What a story it is. Oh.
Last bit is nearly.
Okay, you can read it. Abai went to assert that literature which did not describe the ultimate truth and beauty of the Supreme Person was no better than stool and vomit, even though it be presented as poetry and philosophy. Morality, Abai explained, morality is the standard of activity by which the Supreme Authority is satisfied. The scriptures on unholy sex relations, animal slaughter, intoxication, and gambling. Abai attributed Mahatma Gandhi's success as a public leader to his observance of these moral principles. Abai also praised the Vedic system of marriage. After the attainment, and if she is not married within that time and allowed to mix up with boys, it is quite natural that there is every chance of fall down either by the boy or the girl. Despite changing social conditions, Abai argued, you cannot indulge in unholy connection with the opposite sex just because the social conditions have changed. Because unholy connection with woman is the beginning of. In Scholars Deluded, Abai presented a critical review of Dr. Radhakrishnan's edition of Bhagavad Gita, citing specifically the 34th verse of the 9th chapter, declares that one should always think of him and become his devotee. Dr. Radhakrishnan had commented, it is not the personal Krishna to whom we have to give ourselves up utterly, but the unborn, beginningless, eternal who speaks through Krishna. Although the obvious meaning of Bhagavad Gita was that one should surrender to Krishna, the Supreme Person, Dr. Radhakrishnan obscured the direct meaning with their word jugglery. Will I stop there?
Nice.
Aye.
Shri Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai.
We had to leave now, Prabhu. Sorry, we'll try and Thursday.